Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
Have either of you watched Shadow and Bone, the new TV show yet?
I've not.
That's right. I have.
Yeah. What do you think of it, Ashley?
I was not sure if I liked it.
Why?
It was one of those things where I definitely, I started it, and then I got to a certain point where I was like, not really into this, but now I kind of have to know how it all ends. But the last 30 seconds, I was like, okay, this I can get into. You know what I mean? It definitely made the end. Yeah.
I didn't feel that way, but it's definitely more my style of show than your style of show. It's definitely more fantasy.
Yeah. I like that kind of, I don't know. It was just.
So I binge watched the whole season in 3 days this week.
So I binge watched it in 3 or 4 days too. I watched it all and I watched it, close together, but I got really confused on the locations because obviously they're made up locations. So I kept getting confused, wait, where are they? And I found it very confusing to follow.
It was definitely a show you had to focus, not a show you put on and you multitask through. It's kind of like Game of Thrones that way, where you can't just kind of half pay attention and know what's going on.
Yeah, see, and I've never watched Game of Thrones. So
See, and that's the only thing that I know about Shadow and Bone is I saw a headline somewhere that was Shadow and Bone could be the next Game of Thrones. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I should watch it.
I've never watched Game of Thrones, so I'm a hard judge. But the fact that I have watched it is clearly means that it's not the new Game of Thrones then, because I would never watch Game of Thrones.
It's similar though, the amount of different made up location names and the characters and all the different plots happening at the same time. I could see how you could compare the two.
Sure. I mean, I don't think that, I guess my presumption didn't mean that it was uber violent and full of weird incest, but it could just be it's a complex fantasy world.
Yeah. It was a complex fantasy world for sure.
There's a lot less incest and violence so far in it.
I was very much a fan of the less violence. I'm not a big gore fan.
More magic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I should watch it.
It's good.
All right, so to kind of shift gears into what we are supposed to talk about today, working with partners and just making sure that your projects stay on track. What are your guys' initial thoughts of knowing when to fight back with a consultant or when to make sure that you're getting the project that you need?
It's a great question. I started writing out a list and then I thought, well, I should probably also think about the sorts of red flags that you might be able to see in the sales process, maybe before you commit.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's harder to tell than when you get into a project and then your consultant is like, oh, well, I'm sorry, but to add that field to the form, it's going to take me 560 hours. And you're like, oh, well, that seems maybe a bit high. But I feel like there's my first red flag is in the sales process, if they always say yes to everything. If they never say, that's not a great idea, or I might suggest trying it this way, or have you considered this, or you could solve that 3 different ways, but each one of them has trade-offs. They're just yep, sure, we can do that. Yep, sure, we can do that. In my experience, that suggests a salesperson who's just trying to get to a signature and doesn't actually either know or care what your questions are.
But that holds true through the whole project. You don't want someone that's just going to say yes to everything that you ask for.
Yeah, the old order taking style of consulting. It's I mean, it can work great if you are already an expert in whatever you're trying to implement, but presumably you're hiring a consultant because you're not an expert. And so you kind of have to rely on their expertise. If their expertise suggests that all of the ideas you already had are the best possible solution, then
why did you hire them?
Right. You should start your own consulting practice, I guess.
Right. I always think, so on the same terms, if they're not asking scalable questions to make sure that what you are considering today will work for you. I mean, even just 6, 12, 18 months down the road. I just think about how much businesses have changed in this new environment of, post COVID.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you didn't have the ability to kind of just switch, I don't want to say switch, but, adapt your technology inside of Dynamics, maybe you needed to do things a different way. It wasn't scalable. I mean, that's just, you couldn't adapt that quickly.
Yep. Yep. I've had conversations with people who are like, well, my consultant was like super great and helpful, but like he would just do the thing that I asked him to do. And he wouldn't ask about anything like, well, are you going to want to change this in 6 months? Or like, how flexible does this need to be? How scalable does this need to be? If you're not asking those questions and you can't make a plan for long term, and you're like, oh, I'll just make this a drop down, and then you find out that the values change every 3 months, like, oh, okay, that wasn't the best solution. I should have made it a lookup. But you can't know that if you don't ask.
Because what client asks for an entity, like a lookup? Like they always say they want to drop down and they don't know like the pros and cons to each approach. So you have to unpack that. Like you have to ask the questions about what it actually needs to be.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't know, like most clients don't know the difference, end users.
Well, and I think a lot of times when end users, and also as an end user, right, you ask for things and you don't realize how much of it is nowadays. I think less of it is custom, but back in the day, your only option was to code something, hard code it into the system. And that is not scalable most of the time. You usually have to back it out, rewrite it. And so I do, on a daily basis of, hey, something's been in our system for 4 or 5 years. That was pre-Power Platform. We didn't have the ability to use Power Automate to do something. So we used JavaScript. And now to make it scalable for our organization, it's thousands of dollars, which is very different than just my time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think a consultant should explain, like if someone asks for, like, again, I wouldn't expect the end user to know what's easy and what is complex from a configuration or customization perspective. So they might ask for something that they think is really hard, like hiding and showing a field is easy. There's business rules, but then they might ask for something else where they think it's easy or should be easy, but it's not in our system. And so I think just explaining that to them. And normally if you explain that, then they're informed and they can make like an accurate scope decision.
Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that I was thinking about, and this is something that in sort of starting a new Power Platform practice, as I have done over the last few months, we're trying to focus more on the outcomes as opposed to the requirements. And I feel like this is a bit of a shift in sort of the Dynamics consultant industry. Like all of my previous experience suggests that you focus on requirements. You ask the customer, well, what does it need to do? What do you want it to do? And you focus on functionality and features, and I need to be able to capture these fields, and I need to be able to put them here so that I can put them there so that I can get them there. I'm like, okay, cool, I can make it do that. But instead of focusing on that, trying to shift it more to, well, what's your end result that you're trying to get to? Like, what's your goal? What's your destination? So that you can map out the path to get there, because the set of requirements may or may not lead them there in the most effective or most direct route. And like, sure, you can make it work by putting all these features and functions together and kind of getting to that end goal eventually. But there might have been a faster way. There might have been a way to leverage new technology. But you can't know that unless you ask, well, what's the end result? Like, why do you need to track your opportunities? Well, I'm trying to close more of them. Okay, well, let's focus on what's going to make it so that you can close more opportunities, and how can the technology support that, instead of, yes, I can track your opportunities in CRM. Yes, I can give you a report that shows you your pipeline. And I guess the rest is up to you. So goodbye, have fun.
I agree. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I think that's completely switching from a waterfall methodology to agile. So I would say a lot of the projects that I've worked in the past, you do that. You sit down and say, what do you need the system to do for you? Now working, I've said this before in our, waterfall versus agile debate, that now I work in a fully agile environment. My entire company does, my entire team does. And so this is the first time in my career as well, that I'm very outcome driven. Well, at the end of this, what do you need it to be able to do for you? So like implementing the CPQ system, we're not saying, okay, like what fields of information do you need? We're saying at the end of this, what do you need to produce? What do we need to have done? And then we're kind of backtracking it from there. And I wouldn't say it's easy. It's very, very difficult because you have no idea where your road is going to go, but you get to your end result. I don't want to say more seamlessly, but you get to the end result.
I think you'll have a better end result if you approach it that way. But again, like you might not be able to have like a waterfall scoped out project when you sign that SAO if you're taking that approach.
Right. Like you're not going to have the work breakdown structure and be like, okay, in week 12 of the project, we'll be working on these 3 tasks. You can't know that. But I feel like that's the following that more agile approach and focusing on your destination is going to get you there more directly without sort of taking all these side detours because somebody thought that they needed to have a button that did this. They didn't actually need that button because the system could do it for them if they had this other thing happen over here.
So that kind of brings me to a different thought or idea I have. And I guess that it does apply more to a waterfall project, but I still think like you could approach a waterfall project like with the outcomes and the processes in mind instead of asking like feature and functionality questions. So I think it's still applicable. But like a red flag, I guess I've seen is when the project team like has a different BA on the front of the project that does requirements gathering and then hands it over to a different set of people to actually build it. Like I think it needs to be the whole team all the way through. To have that like cohesiveness and like the understanding of the outcomes, the goals, the processes. I think if you hand it off, even if the front part was done properly, like you're gonna lose a lot in that handoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, being on the end user side, right? I've been at a customer. You always wonder like, why are there so many people in this like requirements gathering? But what you've just said is exactly what I know, right? As an admin, like. Well, I don't want them to like lose something in translation. So it might take more people up front for them to figure out who needs to be involved in order to actually meet your needs.
It's true. That context is really hard to translate to somebody else. And I feel like this is probably one of the largest challenges with organizations that do lots of offshoring is because if you are gathering all your requirements and then writing up your document and then shipping it to a team that is somewhere else to actually do the configuration work, they don't have any of the context that you got in those requirements gathering sessions. So if you don't do a good job of documenting the why, the context, the desired outcomes, any of that stuff, that offshore team is flying blind essentially.
And documenting all of that takes like a huge amount of time.
Yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah, because even for myself, I mean, I do all of my own configuration, right? So I never actually build what I documented. I don't think that has ever happened to me because you get in there and you're like, oh, it would be better if it was like this based on this thing that they said, and you see ideas as you're doing it. And so you're right, you completely lose that context of what they're looking for if you send it out to someone else.
Yep. That's actually that's a very interesting point. It's made me think of this book that I'm reading, which is still on the desk behind me. That's all about product teams and empowering the product team. And one of the points the book makes is instead of telling a team of people doing a thing, whether it's, they're building an app or they're building a Dynamics app, whatever, instead of saying, I need you to make it do X, Y, and Z, you say to them, I need it to solve this problem. And then you let the team figure out the best way to solve the problem. Because to your point, you might not realize the best solution when you're documenting what you needed to do, or you might not have the technical expertise to know that like, oh, there's this new feature that Power Apps just added that would let me do it this way instead of doing it that way. Whereas the team of people, the actual like developers and functional consultants are more hands-on with the technology. They ought to be able to find the best way to solve that problem without being sort of told you should solve it this way.
So I have 2 questions on it, Merlin. First, what's the name of the book?
It is called Empowered.
Okay.
He's talked about it before.
Has he?
I've talked
about
it. Is this the same book or a different book?
This is the same one.
It's the same one. I'm taking a really long time to read it.
Yeah. How far are you? Like halfway, maybe?
Like a third.
Oh, okay. Hey, you know what?
Great. So we're going to hear about it for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Every time he
Wonderful.
hits like a little nugget, it'll come up.
What was your second question?
Yeah, I was just thinking that
Oh,
today.
it's all right.
It's not good today, guys.
It's all right. One of my other red flags, sort of leading into thinking about the team and knowing the technology, is consultants probably shouldn't be charging you to like learn the new technology. And this is actually something that I have found myself thinking more about recently because I do a lot of estimating, and the sort of default like training on how you estimate is, well, if you don't know what it's going to take, you just make the number bigger, right? Because there's more risk there. Right. And it was pointed out to me very recently by my colleague and coworker that, well, why are we asking the customer to take on the risk for that? Like, they're not the ones who are going to learn the tech and be able to apply that skill set into the future. Like, we as the consultants are going to carry that.
How do you feel like an end user could tell that a consultant is overestimating or using billable time to learn the new technology though? Because like, I'm assuming that the end user also doesn't really know how much effort it would take. And that's why they're not an expert, and that's why they're hiring a consultant or a team of consultants. So like any advice on how an end user would actually be able to pick up on that?
Yeah, we can tell.
You can?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it depends. So I've been on projects that run really smooth, and I've been on projects that run really poorly. And you can tell the difference on the poorly ones if it's a lack of knowledge or it was just maybe they didn't have the right people. I mean, you can tell based on how the project goes. The one that I think of is I did an upgrade on Prem from 2016 to D365. And it was the first one the partner had done to D365. So you could tell that it was just a lack of knowledge and lack of just understanding, and we were paying for them to be able to do it better in the future for their other customers. Now, did they ever not bill us some hours for some things? I don't know. They never told us. So maybe they were additionally learning on the side, and it just was that. I mean, it was not easy, right, to upgrade on-prem that's not an easy task.
Right.
But you could tell.
Did they tell you that you were the first one, or you could just tell?
They did tell us later that we were the first,
but not up front. Same.
Yeah.
And I would have appreciated it, right? Like, had they said up front, like, and that's why get an honest partner. Like, of course, like, you don't want a partner that's going to lie to you, but you really have to like see that from the sales cycle going forward. Not that they lied to us, not that they probably thought it would be like any other upgrade, right? On-prem upgrades, you do them yourself. It's not, I don't want to say hard, but but yeah, it was a fun project. It was the only project that made me want to like rethink what I was doing with my life. Like, is this really what I want to do? I want to sit here and test all this and recreate everything.
It sounds awful.
It does sound kind of awful.
They were probably afraid if they were honest up front that you wouldn't have selected them for the upgrade.
I mean, they were just our partner. So,
but still, you could have switched partners and gone to a different partner just for that project, like someone that was more experienced with that.
Right. I always appreciate the honesty. I'm from a partner, even if they think it's going to come across bad. The fact that you're being honest about it makes a much bigger impression.
Yeah, that's the hope. It's the approach that we're trying.
Like me.
I know. I hope so too. Okay. Sorry.
No,
let's go ahead.
You had a good one.
I was just thinking. This comes out of like a long time ago. I went to like a sales meeting where we were doing a demo, and we as the partner came in with, I think, 5 or 6 people. There was like the boss guy, the sales contact, the person doing the ERP demo, me doing the CRM demo, somebody else to talk about, I don't know, servers and things, because it was that long ago. And then like maybe one other person. And then there were like 2 or 3 people from the customer in the room. And so we like show up with this sales army of all these different people to talk about all this expertise. And I remember thinking sort of in that moment and then after the fact, and it was like, I feel like we came off looking silly there.
Or desperate.
Right, we're desperate. We did not win that deal. And I'm not actually surprised that we didn't win that deal because I didn't feel like we represented our expertise very well. We represented as we have a handful of specialists, but we want to come here and like impress you with all of our people and all of our snacks or whatever, you know, you bring along on the meeting. And that's not actually what the sales process is about. That's not necessarily going to represent the expertise of the organization overall.
I agree. I mean, not that you'll ever know how many people they're bringing unless you ask, right? I just truly don't believe that the partner should ever have more people than the customer. That's my impression based on having a lot of these partner selection meetings in my lifetime. I've gone through partner selection, I've gone through vendor selection, and even the vendor, they chose the vendor that had the least amount of people there in the end, which is ironic, right?
But the partner should ask the client how, like, who and how many of those, so that they can tailor who they bring.
Correct.
Yeah, because if they don't know, they're just doing a one size fits all, and like it does depend on like who's going to be in that room there with you, and you want to kind of adapt to that.
You only need two people. You need a sales guy, you need a technical expert. It's good enough.
No, but I agree, right? Because you have like Merlin, in your case, you had somebody that knows F&O and somebody that knows CRM. Like you couldn't do the F&O demo, right? And he probably couldn't have done the CRM demo. So it totally changes based on what your needs are as well. But hopefully in a situation where a customer needs both products, it's probably not the same person in charge of both finance and sales. So you just say.
I will say, like, to your point, Merlin, let's say it's just CE, for example, and we're not kind of doing multiple product demos. If they bring more than the technical salesperson, it probably means that those two people aren't like capable or confident enough to be alone in that meeting, which is another red flag.
It's true. And I will say, like, there's exceptions. Like sometimes, I mean, we were just talking about field service not that long ago. Like, if you get like deep into something like field service, you probably need to have like a field service expert who is probably not the same person as the one who's doing like the demo. And the person doing the demo is going to be like comfortable showing and demoing field service. But, you know, if the like technician service manager starts asking, well, my techs need to be able to do this and need to be able to do this, and like gets into like some hardcore details, you might need a product expert, you know, along with you as well to sort of represent that extra level of expertise and depth. But I agree, like when you show up with an army, like I just feel like it always makes you look kind of foolish, like nobody understands the whole picture, like everybody just has their own little sliver. And I feel like that's going to be difficult to build a collaborative team for an implementation.
Well, and I think that everybody that's there should have a purpose. Like if you're not speaking, you probably shouldn't be there, because the customer is going to be sitting there the whole time wondering, well, does he know something that he's not sharing? Or is he just like the bodyguard? Is he here for a show? You know what I mean? Or she, right? So it's like, I think everybody who's invited, and same on the customer side, right? I don't think the customers should bring people who aren't going to speak up and be able to share like what the vision is and what you're looking for. It should all the parties should be involved in the conversation.
I want a bodyguard now. I feel like I should bring a bodyguard to sales meetings. It'd be awesome. Make me feel like a celebrity.
That's the reason I'm not a celebrity, is because I don't want a bodyguard.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason though.
So since we're on the meeting and kind of like, I don't role topic, I would say like you need to clearly define all roles on the consultant project team and the end user team. I think if you don't, and if you don't have all the critical roles clearly filled, like that's just a big warning sign. And I think that should happen right away. Like if they're going to say like, oh, we'll do that a month into the project, you can just assume it won't happen, or it's going to be too far gone by that point for it to like help. And then I think it's just as bad as having too many meetings or too many people in the meeting is like not having the right people and like not having enough. And then I think you have to find the balance too of like meetings that aren't worthwhile versus meeting like not enough meetings. Like I've seen projects where like you try to build in a vacuum and you try to talk as little as possible to the client, and like that doesn't go well either. Like you need the right amount of communication and like effective communication, and it's not too little or too much. It's this happy medium. And I don't think like a delivery process, while you can have a standard one for a partner, like that it's a one size fits all approach for a variety of reasons. Like the client's culture and their needs might be different, but oftentimes too, like you have to scale it to kind of the size and the complexity of the project and the players and the roles that the customer has. And so I think you have to factor that all in when you're planning out a project and kind of getting it going, but also be willing to adapt. Like you might have started it a certain way with a certain plan, but if you feel like something's not working, and hopefully if you're agile, you're doing retrospectives, like you can pick up on that along the way and make adjustments instead of just continuing forward with something that's not going well. And like it's obvious to everyone that it's not.
Going back to the roles, I think that it's really important to have somebody involved in those meetings that can actually make decisions. I've seen way too many times that it's like, a C-level person, a VP, the final say has to go through them, but they're not joining the meetings. They're too busy. They're not as involved. So you come up with stuff in a meeting and then you can't actually take action on it until you get approval from somebody who's not there.
You have this giant list of to-dos and it's like waiting on approval, waiting on input, waiting on approval. And it's like each week and you're blocked on them because the person that can make the decisions, not involved, too busy, whatever. That's a great way to push out like timeline for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The decision maker has to be involved, even if that's not like higher position, somebody who knows the project.
Right. And it doesn't have to be a C-level. Like that's the thing. Like it could be a lower level person, but you need to empower them to make that decision. Yep, give them the authority to.
Yep. I feel like adding on to the roles again is ongoing maintenance. Like who owns it after the implementation is done, right? Like at the end of the day, you're going to implement your system to do whatever your outcomes were. And then what? Like probably most of the consulting team is going to go away. Who's going to keep it running? Who's going to make ongoing changes? Who's going to be able to add values to that dropdown? And I feel like often no one makes that plan up front when it should be made.
That's what I was going to ask is when do you normally start asking or talking about that?
I mean, I feel like you got to talk about that right away, because if nothing else, the customer needs to be thinking about, like, if they don't already have that in a plan, they need the duration of the project to make that plan. You can't just like bring it up 2 weeks before go live.
Or after go live.
Or after go live. Like, okay, well,
how are you going to support it?
I need to do my knowledge transfer to somebody. Who's going to do it? And you're like, I guess Janet over there in accounting, she was on the project team. So just tell her how to do the new user stuff and we'll just hope for the best. Like,
well, not only that, somebody has to own the system. Somebody has to be responsible for it, whether or not it's their full-time job. Like you see this a lot when you first implement, it might be a sales operations person or marketing, they just get involved enough to train or, if there's new needs, how to document, but you still have to identify who that person is. I mean, that's how I started. I was in marketing and there was a need for somebody just part-time to fill in and start building some things out. And then in 2011, you could just do it all yourself, which is awesome. So it's like, I'm just saying somebody has to be responsible for owning it. Because especially if it crashes or if it goes down, who are you, the consultant, I mean, they're not going to be there anymore unless you've hired on a support plan or something.
Even if you have a consultant sign up for a support plan or like ongoing support, I still think someone from the customer, the end user needs to be the owner, even if it's a part-time.
Well, they need a point of contact.
Right.
At the end of the day, the consultant needs a point of contact at the end user.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and then the owner has to be the person who's essentially making the decisions about, yes, the product should do this and it should do it that way. Like the consultant can say, well, if it were my business, I would do it that way, but it's not the consultant's business. So like someone has to say, yep, that makes sense for our business, for our model, for our whatever, let's do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So any lasting thoughts from you guys on things to keep aware of when working with partners?
Should we talk about too much overhead?
Oh.
Yeah. So I have two examples, like just overkill on like technical stuff, like environments or like unnecessary coding or over documentation. Like I think there's a lot of different areas of the project where I've seen project teams like do unnecessary things that add little to no value that take up a ton of time and obviously a ton of budget. Yeah, so I would just say like watch out for stuff like that.
The documentation one is a big one for me because sure, it's great. Like you just start a project and you're like, oh, I want every decision that we've made documented and how it's going to work. And I've never gone back and read any of those as an end user. So yep. I like, we talked about this on the Agile conversation before, is like having like a Jira board or Azure DevOps, right? So it's like keeping track of the decisions that you're making in there, because then you can just search it really easily. But it's super changeable, right? Because you're going to change, and then you have this Word document with a bunch of outlines or red lines. And
well, the Word document, unless someone's going to maintain that going forward, becomes outdated the minute you change something after go live. And like, yeah, to your point, do you really want to search through or read through like hundreds of pages of notes in a Word document? Right.
Is that effective? I'm impressed you think that Word document's going to make it to go live and still be accurate. Like,
I've had projects where I was changing that Word document like up until the day of go live.
Me too. Me too. Because it's a requirement. Yeah.
Terrible waste of time and money.
I agree.
That's why we're talking about it.
Right. And I think that like just overhead in general, right? It's not just time. It's not just people. Like Liz, you mentioned it's environments too. So like how many environments do you really need to go live?
Well, and it depends on the project. Like it completely depends on the complexity and the deployment of that. And you always want a sandbox and a production, like 2 at a minimum, but like 2 is perfectly fine for a lot of like smaller, more simple deployments. Like you don't need to always have 6, let's say.
Like me.
Right. Well, and it depends on how many teams of people do you have working on things. So like I was working preliminarily with the customer, and they were trying to do like a simultaneous rollout of field service for like 3 divisions in Europe, plus starting a sales implementation for some people in North America. And so they were trying to do a lot of stuff all at one time. And so like the suggestion from our technical resources at the time was, I think, like 6 different development environments that rolled together to 2 or 3 different testing environments that came together to a staging, a UAT, and a production. So there were lots of environments, but that was because you had development teams working on each of those different dev environments, and you don't want to introduce cross dependencies between teams. And so everybody needs their own environment, but then you have to start rolling things together to test it. And it's like, in some of those situations, you do need a lot of environments.
But that seems like you had simultaneous independent projects happening. Like that's a very unique, complex example.
If you got one team of people doing one deployment, they can all do it in one environment. Right? Like you can move that solution to production all at the same time.
You should be able to do it.
You should be able to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything else, Marilyn? Any last thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I feel like I've ranted about lots of pet peeves of mine over the course of time, so I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. All right. Well, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at DynamicsHotDish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.